My name is Brenda, and welcome to Horrifying History, where you will hear about the unexplained, paranormal, and supernatural happenings that has stained the pages of history. Imagine for a moment doing something so horrendous that it results in you being the star of a nursery rhyme. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she'd done, she gave her father 41. But what if it wasn't even true? Welcome to episode 66, Lizzie Borden, axe murderer or victim of circumstance. It's getting closer to Halloween, and to get you guys in the spirit, I want to recommend a novella called Crazy Is as Crazy Does, The Life of a Serial Killer by John H. Mudgett. This historical fiction tells the life story of a man who evolves from a timid, disorganized criminal into a powerful and deceptive serial killer. You can find Crazy Is as Crazy Does, The Life of a Serial Killer on Amazon, or you can get your copy for free if you're a Kindle Unlimited user. And now, back to our show. It wasn't long after Lizzie Borden was accused of murdering her father and stepmother for the public to start obsessing about her case. People became obsessed with the story that on a hot summer day in August of 1892, a prim and proper church-going young woman from Fall River, Massachusetts, may have brutally murdered two of her family members with an axe. Lizzie's acquittal in June of 1893 only further stoked interest in this case, and soon this interest became legend. Lizzie Borden has become a lasting figure in pop culture. From a nursery rhyme sung in schoolyards to the Netflix show called The Lizzie Borden Chronicles, we are still talking about this case today. As much as the facts of this case are fairly straightforward, the case itself is full of tampered evidence, inconsistent testimonies, and hazy details. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born on July 19, 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts in the United States to mother Sarah and father Andrew Jackson Borden. Her father grew up in very modest surroundings and struggled financially when he was young, despite he was descended from very wealthy and influential people. He started to prosper after he started manufacturing and selling furniture and caskets, and soon afterwards he became a successful land developer. He was also the director of several textile mills, owned a sizable amount of commercial property, and was a director at the Union Savings Bank as well as the Due-Free Sales Deposit and Trust Company. At the time of his death, Andrew was a wealthy man, and he was worth about $9 million in today's U.S. funds. Despite of his wealth, Andrew was well known to be frugal. Examples of this was that the Borden home did not have indoor plumbing, and this was considered to be very common for the wealthy at the time. Andrew also chose to live in a good area of town, but not where the wealthy of Fall River lived. Their house was small and shabby and also didn't have electricity. On March 26, 1863, Lizzie and her sister Emma's life took a turn for the worse. Their mother Sarah, she passed away at the age of 39 from what was said to be uterine congestion and spinal disease. 3 years after her death, Andrew remarried a woman named Abby Dufree Gray, and there is plenty of evidence to show that this caused issues with Lizzie. Lizzie would tell people that she called Abby Mrs. Borden, and their relationship was not cordial. This was due in part to Lizzie believing that Abby married her father for his money. During Lizzie's later trial, Bridget Sullivan, who was the Borden's 25-year-old live-in maid, testified that Lizzie and Emma rarely ate meals with Andrew and Abby. Even with all of this, Lizzie's life was considered to be by most uneventful. She attended the Morgan Street School, which was located near her home, and then she attended the local high school. After graduating, she was very active in her church and taught Sunday school. She also served as secretary for the local Christian Endeavor Society, was a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and was involved with the Ladies' Fruit and Flower Mission. She also traveled abroad during this time, and to outsiders looking in, her life seemed charmed. But it wasn't. The relationship of Abby and Lizzie also caused tension and resentment in the household, and this was further added to by the actions of Andrew. An example of this was in May of 1892, when it said Andrew killed multiple pigeons that were roosting in his barn with a hatchet. Lizzie had recently built a roost for these birds, and it said that she was very upset by her father's actions. After a family argument occurred in July of 1892, both Lizzie and Emma decided to take an extended vacation in nearby New Bedford. After returning a week before the murders, Lizzie decided to stay at a local rooming house versus going home. She stayed there for 4 days before returning to the family residence. So why was there a family dispute? Tensions were growing within the household for months. Much of this was about Andrew's decision to start giving gifts of real estate to various people in Abby's family. After Andrew gave Abby's half-sister a house, Lizzie and Emma demanded their father give them one, and so he did. He gave them a rental property which was once the house the family lived in until their mother Sarah died, and he also gave them a small weekly income. Andrew demanded that the girls buy the house from him for the price of $1, but a few weeks before the murders, they sold it back to him for the sum of $5,000, or what would be approximately $142,000 in today's funds. The night before the murders, Lizzie and Emma's uncle John visited the house. John was the brother of their deceased mother, and he was invited to stay a few days to discuss business matters with Andrew. Some believe that these conversations that included talk about property transfer aggravated the already tense situation within the Borden household. According to various accounts, Lizzie suffered from mental issues during this time. She was well known locally to be a kleptomaniac, and local shopkeepers would check for missing items in their stores after she left them. They would then send Andrew bills for what she allegedly stole, and Andrew would just pay them. After Abby discovered that her jewelry box was rifled through in 1891, Andrew bought and installed locks for his bedroom door. And then came the mystery illness. Several days before the murders, both Andrew and Abby were struck down with a violent illness of unknown origin which induced vomiting. A family friend later speculated that they'd eaten lamb that was used in several meals over several days, and they had left it out on the stove, and this caused food poisoning, but that's not what Abby thought. She told several people that she believed she and her husband were poisoned due to Andrew was not a popular man in Falls River. Everything came to a head on August 4th, 1892. As previously mentioned, Uncle John had come to visit and arrived the evening of August 3rd. As everybody retired for the evening, Uncle John went to bed in the guest room. The next day, John had breakfast with Andrew, Abby, and Lizzie, with their maid Bridget, who they called Maggie, attending them. Afterwards, Andrew and Uncle John went to the sitting room to chat some more before John left around 8:48 a.m. He planned to purchase a pair of oxen and visit another niece who lived in Fall River before returning to the Borden home for lunch about noon. A few minutes later, Andrew left to take his morning walk. Even though cleaning the guest room was one of Lizzie and Emma's assigned chores, it was Abby that went upstairs sometime between 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. to make John's bed. It is believed that during this time frame, Abby was attacked. According to the crime scene investigation, it is believed that Abby was facing her killer when she was attacked. She was struck on the side of the head with a hatchet, which cut her right above her ear. This caused Abby to turn and fall face down on the floor, which caused contusions on her nose and forehead. Her killer then struck her multiple times and delivered 17 direct blows to the back of her head, which killed her. When Andrew returned from his walk at about 10:30 a.m., his key did not work to unlock the door. He knocked, and Bridget went to the door. When she went to unlock it, she found it jammed. Bridget later testified when she uttered an expletive when realizing the door was jammed shut, she heard Lizzie laughing. She said she didn't see Lizzie, but stated that the laughter started immediately after she realized this door was stuck. Now, this was considered to be a very important part of her statement, since Abby was already dead at this point in time, and where her body lay would be visible to anybody on the second floor of the Borden home. But according to Lizzie's testimony, She wasn't there. She denied being upstairs and said that her father came to her and asked her where Abby was. Supposedly, Lizzie told him that a messenger came to the house and delivered her a summons to visit a sick friend. Lizzie further testified that she helped remove her father's boots and helped him put on some slippers before he lay down on the sofa to take a nap. She then found Bridget to tell her about a local department store having a sale and suggested that she go. Lizzie then said Bridget told her that she felt sick and went to take a nap in her bedroom, but there's problems with this story. According to the crime scene photos, Andrew was not wearing slippers at his death scene. He was wearing his boots. Now, according to Bridget's testimony, she was in her third-floor room taking a rest after washing windows when just before 11:10 a.m., she heard Lizzie calling her from downstairs. "Maggie, come quick! Father's dead! Someone came in and killed him!" Bridget rushed downstairs to find Andrew slumped on the couch where Lizzie alleged her father was taking a nap in the downstairs sitting room. He was struck multiple times with a hatchet-like weapon. One of his eyes was split in two, which suggested he was attacked during sleep. His wounds were still bleeding, and this suggested it was a very recent attack. The family's physician, Dr. Bowen, was contacted since he lived right across the street from the Bordens' home. He pronounced both Abby and Andrew dead, and his death was estimated to have occurred at about 11 a.m. that day. The police were then called and they swarmed the crime scene. Immediately, police thought that Lizzie's initial answers to their questions were a bit odd and were contradictory. At first, she claimed to hear a groan, a scraping noise, or a call of distress before she entered the house. 2 hours later, she told police she heard nothing, and there was no indication that anything was wrong at all. When asked where she thought her stepmother was, Lizzie told police that she thought Abby was visiting her sick friend. She further stated that she thought Abby had returned and she asked somebody just to go upstairs to find her. Bridget and a neighbor named Mrs. Churchill walked together up the stairs to the second floor. Halfway up is where they first saw Abby's bludgeoned body laying face down on the floor. Most of the officers who spoke to Lizzie that day later stated that they did not like her attitude, or she was just too calm and poised concerning her current circumstance. Despite this and the holes in her story, police didn't check her for any marks or any possible blood splatter. Police did search her room, but later admitted they felt that they couldn't do a proper search since they were told that Lizzie was not feeling well. They did search other areas of the house, though, and in the basement, they found 2 hatchets, 2 axes, and a hatchet head with a broken handle. The hatchet head was suspected of being the murder weapon since there was a break in a handle and it looked fresh, and the ash and dust on it appeared to be recently applied to make it look like it was sitting with the other tools. Now, interestingly, not one of these was taken out of the house, but because of the mysterious illness that affected both Andrew and Abby, police decided to test the family's milk supply and the contents of both Abby and Andrew's stomachs. Nothing suspicious was found, even though local rumors said Lizzie purchased hydrodynamic acid in a diluted form from a local drugstore. Lizzie defended this by saying she inquired about buying this to clean her furs, despite testimony that this did not have antiseptic qualities. Following the murders, Lizzie and Emma's friend Alice Russell decided to stay with them at the house the night following Abby and Andrew's deaths. Uncle John, he also stayed, but not in the guest room where Abby died. He stayed in the attic guest room, contrary to later accounts. The police were stationed outside the house that night, and afterwards an officer stated he saw Lizzie enter the cellar with Alice. She was carrying a kerosene lamp and a slop pail. He further said that both women exited the cellar, but afterwards Lizzie returned alone. He was unable to see what she was doing in the cellar, but he said it appeared she was bent over a sink. The next day, Uncle John left the house and he was mobbed by hundreds of people. Police had to escort him back to the Borden home for his own safety. On August 6th, police conducted a more thorough search of the house and finally inspected Lizzie's clothing and took the broken-handled hatchet head. That same evening, a police officer and the Falls River mayor came to the house and informed Lizzie that she was a suspect in the murders of her father and stepmother. The following morning, Alice walked into the kitchen to find Lizzie tearing up one of her dresses. Lizzie told Alice that she was going to burn it since it was covered with paint. It was never determined if this dress was covered with paint or perhaps something else. It was also not confirmed if the dress was the one that Lizzie wore on the day of the murders. On August 8th, Lizzie was ordered to appear at an inquest hearing concerning Andrew and Abby's deaths. Her request to have her attorney present was refused due to, during that time, under state statute, an inquest had to be held in private. Before the inquest, Lizzie was prescribed regular doses of morphine to calm her nerves, and many experts believe this affected her testimony. Now, personally, I don't see how it couldn't have. I've been given morphine several times in the past when I was in the hospital, and it made me loopy as hell. This may explain why Lizzie's behavior was seen to be very erratic, and why she would only answer the questions that appeared to be beneficial to her. She contradicted herself quite often, and she provided many alternative accounts of the morning in question, including she was in the kitchen reading a magazine when her father came home, she was in the dining room ironing, and also the above mentioned helping her father put on slippers when his death photos showed that he was wearing boots. The inquest testimony was later ruled to be inadmissible in her trial, which started in June of 1893. It was said that the district attorney was very aggressive and confrontational towards Lizzie during her questioning. Newspaper articles from the time noted that Lizzie possessed a solid demeanor and she bit her lips and was very flushed. Even though this inquest was not admissible, it was reported on and got significant press attention nationwide. It was reported that the testimony that occurred that day had, and I quote, caused a change of opinion amongst her friends who have theretofore strongly maintained her innocence. On August 11th, Lizzie was served with a warrant, was arrested, and was brought to jail. A grand jury began hearing evidence on November 7th, and on December 2nd, Lizzie was indicted. Her trial took place in nearby New Bedford starting on June 5, 1893. Ironically, 5 days before the trial started, another axe murder happened in Fall River. The victim was a woman named Bertha Manchester, and she was found to be hacked to death in her kitchen. The similarities between Bertha and the Bordens was striking and noted by the jurors, but ultimately, a man named Jose Corella de Mello was later convicted of Bertha's murder and was determined not to have been in the area of Fall River during the Borden murders. Also during the trial and the subsequent press coverage of it, the hatchet head found in the basement became a subject of debate. This was due to it was not convincingly demonstrated by the prosecution to actually be the murder weapon. Prosecutors argued that the killer must have removed the axe handle because it was covered with blood. But I have one question here. Why would he do that? Luminol, which is used by law enforcement to detect blood, was not invented until 1937. For those who are not aware, when luminol is sprayed evenly across an area, trace amounts of activating oxide makes luminol emit a blue glow that can be seen in a darkened room when it comes in contact with blood. It is used to detect blood stains at crime scenes that have been cleaned years afterwards. With that said, since luminol or similar technology did not exist, all that murderer needed to do was wash the blood off. Why go so far to break a handle in attempts to hide the blood? Now, to make this even more confusing, one officer testified that a hatchet handle was found near the hatchet head, but then another officer contradicted this testimony. No bloody clothing was found at the scene, but then Alice testified at trial that she witnessed Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove after telling her that it was ruined when she brushed up on some wet paint. During the trial, the defense did not even attempt to challenge this statement at all. Lizzie's presence in the home was also a point of dispute during her trial. According to testimony, Bridget went to the second floor of the home around 10:48 a.m. while Lizzie and her father were downstairs. Lizzie told multiple people, though, she was not in the house during this time frame. She was actually in the barn and was not in the house for about 20 minutes to half an hour. A man named Hyman Lubinsky testified for the defense that he saw Lizzie leaving the barn at about 11:03 a.m., and another man named Charles Garden confirmed this. At 11:10 a.m., Lizzie called Bridget to come downstairs and told her that Andrew is dead. She ordered Bridget not to go into the room where her father's body was and sent her to get the family doctor who lived across the street. Now, another evidence piece that was submitted was, believe it or not, Andrew and Abby's skulls. Both victims' heads were removed during their autopsies. When they were brought into the courtroom and Lizzie saw them, she immediately passed out. Evidence that was excluded was that Lizzie supposedly tried to purchase acid to clean a sealskin cloak from a local druggist the day before the murderers. The presiding judge ruled that this action was too remote in time to have any connection to the murders. After all this, the jury went to deliberate, and on June 20th, 1893, after only half an hour, they came back with a not guilty verdict. When exiting the courthouse, Lizzie told reporters that she was, and I quote, "the happiest woman in the world." After the trial, both of the Borden sisters moved into a very large modern house in the wealthiest part of town called The Hill, which Lizzie named Maplecroft. It was at this point of our story where Lizzie started going by the name of Lisbeth A. Borden, perhaps as a way to distance herself away from the trial. Her new life was just how she dreamed. She was in the wealthy part of town, she had a staff of live-in maids, a housekeeper, and a coachman. The girls were now considered to be very wealthy. Since Abby, she died before Andrew. Her part of the estate had gone to Andrew. When Andrew was killed, his and Abby's portion went to his daughters. But this didn't stop Abby's family from making claims against the estate, and apparently a considerable settlement was paid out to her relatives. Despite of this, Lizzie's life was not what she dreamed. She was ostracized by Fall River society despite her acquittal. Her name came out to the public again after she was accused of shoplifting in Providence, Rhode Island in 1897. Then, in 1905, Lizzie and Emma had a huge argument over a party that Lizzie threw for actress Nancy O'Neill. Emma moved out, and the sisters never spoke or saw each other again. So what happened to Lizzie? Following the removal of her gallbladder, she remained ill for the last year of her life. She died of pneumonia on June 1st, 1927 in Fall River. Her funeral details were not published, and very few people actually attended. 9 days later, her sister Emma died from chronic kidney disease at the age of 76. She died at the nursing home she lived at, where she moved in 1923 for both health reasons and to avoid the newest publicity that was occurring due to another book about the murders was released. Both of the girls were buried beside each other in the family plot in the Oak Grove Cemetery in Fall River. At the time of Lizzie's death, she was worth approximately $5 million in today's funds and owned multiple properties, both residential and commercial. She also had valuable possessions and stakes in several utility companies. She left her money to the Fall River Animal Rescue and to numerous friends and relations. She also left money in trust for the care of her father's grave. The Lizzie Borden murder case is considered to be one of the most famous in American criminal history, but there are as many people out there who believe she killed Andrew and Abby as there is people who don't. Cultural, religious, class, ethnic, and gender divisions in the town of Fall River helped shape this debate and brought a country into this discussion. But was she actually guilty? Did she get away with murder? Or was she a scapegoat for somebody else? Now let's look at the facts. The killer attacked the victims in their home with no signs of forced entry, but in those times it was very common in a small town not to lock your doors. The murders occurred in broad daylight on a busy street, about a block away from Fall River's business district. Neighbors and passers-by, they heard nothing. No one saw a suspect either enter or leave the residence. There was no clear motive. Nothing was stolen. The victims were not sexually assaulted. But clearly, the murderer, due to the violence behind that killing, felt a lot of anger. Whether it was against the Bordens or anger in general, we have no way to know. Also, Andrew Borden, he was not an average citizen of Fall River. He possessed great wealth for that time, and he invested in local banks and real estate. Andrew didn't show off his wealth, though, and in fact, he did the opposite. He lived in a modest house that was not in the fashionable area in town versus living in the rich area called The Hill. It was very well known that 32-year-old Lizzie, who still lived at home, longed to live in the rich side of town. She was well aware that her father could afford to move away from the area that they were living in that was getting further and further populated by Catholic immigrants. This bugged Lizzie since she belonged to the Central Congregational Church and she supported what the locals did: rampant nativism. It is because of this that you guys shouldn't be surprised to hear that immediately the local police decided that a male must have committed the crime, and it was likely a foreigner. Within a couple hours, the police arrested their first suspect, who just happened to be an innocent Portuguese immigrant. Now let's look at a couple more facts. On the day of the murders, Lizzie claimed she came into the house from the barn and she discovered her father's body. She yelled for Bridget to come from where she was resting on the third floor of the house. Bridget allegedly heard nothing while she rested. When Bridget joined Lizzie, Lizzie told her that she needed the doctor to come. She sent the servant across the street to the family physician's home, but he wasn't home at the time, so Lizzie then sent Bridget to get her friend Alice Russell from down the street. Interestingly, she did not send Bridget to get the Irish immigrant doctor who lived right next door. He served as Fall River City physician and was highly educated and experienced. Lizzie also did not seek the help of a French-Canadian doctor who lived diagonally behind the Borden's home. Why would she not immediately contact the police and only send Bridget to get a specific doctor? Why would she not seek the help of any available medical professional? Was it due to blatant racism, or perhaps was it a delay tactic? These same race and class divisions helped Lizzie from being on the suspect list for quite a while. After all, she was a Sunday school teacher at her wealthy Central Congregational Church. The higher class of Fall River just couldn't accept that a person like them would kill her own father and stepmother. But during the interrogation, her answers started to change, and people's views, they started to change too. This, along with the fact that Lizzie did not shed one tear in public, aroused the police's suspicion. Then it was discovered that Lizzie tried to buy that deadly acid one day before the murders from a local drugstore. Instead of her class supporting her innocence, now her gender came into play. Why wouldn't a delicate young flower of a woman that had class and money not cry when her family members were murdered? Well, in my opinion, the police used bias in their decision-making here. They did not, at this point, even consider that there was a major conflict in the home and that Lizzie hated her stepmother. She was angry that they were not living according to their means and that her father was giving money and property to Abby's family. She believed that Abby was only after her father's money and she was watching it go out the window to people she felt wasn't entitled to it. But with that said, people started to believe that since Lizzie attempted to purchase an acid from the drugstore, that she must have been the cause of Andrew and Abby's mysterious illness. But the problem with this is she attempted to make the purchase after the elder Bordens became ill. Another piece to this puzzle is that Fall River's immigrant population started to blow up at this time, and more individuals of Irish descent turned to policing. On the day of the murders, Irish police officers responded and were among the dozen or so people who took control of the Borden home and property. They interviewed Lizzie, and she was not used to being held accountable by those she considered to be a lower class than her. Police reported at this time that they didn't like Lizzie's attitude, and she appeared to be too calm for the circumstances. Could her own bigotry and racism been the cause of this? Could it also been possible that she may have been shutting down due to the trauma she just endured when she walked into a room and saw her father bludgeoned to death? Now, the Borden case quickly became a point of contention for the people in Fall River. With shifting composition of the police force combining with the recent election of the city's second Irish mayor, Dr. John Coghlan, many of Fall River's elite saw this as a challenge to native-born control. What added to this was that Dr. Coghlan's newspaper, the Fall River Globe, had completely biased reporting. It published militant-based ideology directed towards the Irish working class that attacked the local mill owners, and if you guys remember, Andrew Borden was the director of several textile mills. Soon after the murders, the newspaper started to focus its class combativeness on Lizzie's guilt. It promoted rumors that the Borden's relations were stockpiling millions and millions of dollars to ensure that Lizzie would never be convicted. Meanwhile, the newspaper called the Fall River Evening News, who supported those on the Hill, defended Lizzie's innocence. More and more consistency started to pile up on the case, and Lizzie's own testimony led her down the road of supposed self-incrimination. She was not allowed a lawyer to be present due to the regulations concerning a closed inquiry, and her being high on morphine, well, that didn't help. But it's not that she didn't have people defending her. The family's doctor, who staunchly believed in Lizzie's innocence, testified that right after the murders, he prescribed her morphine to calm her nerves in the day and double doses to help her sleep at night. He claimed the side effects would account for Lizzie's complete confusion and her changing story. Her sister Emma, who also lived in the home, testified that the sisters had no ill will or anger towards Abby. But the problem was that friends and neighbors who give interviews to the press, well, they suggested otherwise. With Emma being away on vacation, Lizzie and Bridget were the only ones in the home with Abby after Andrew went on his morning walk. Uncle John, he wasn't home either. Bridget was supposedly outside washing windows during the time frame that Abby was murdered in the second-floor guest room, but she supposedly heard nothing. While Andrew was being bludgeoned in the first-floor sitting room, Bridget, who was allegedly asleep in her third-floor bedroom, said she heard, once again, nothing. Considering that forensics at the time said that Abby was facing her killer and then she rotated and fell landing on her face, this makes me a little suspect. Personally, if I had somebody hurtling an axe towards my face, I'm pretty sure that I'd make some sort of noise. Could it be possible that Lizzie snuck up to her stepmother, pulled out a hatchet, and killed her before she had any chance to react? Is it possible she then went downstairs and killed her sleeping father? Or is it also possible that Bridget was lying all along? Could it have been that Lizzie was outside in the barn, and while gone, Bridget killed the Bordens? Did she then go upstairs to her room and wait for Lizzie to come back to discover her dad? Well, the police, they didn't even look at this at all. The judge, the district attorney, and the police marshal quickly came to the conclusion that due to the inconsistencies in Lizzie's story, that Lizzie was probably guilty. They went after her as their suspect versus looking at all of the options. As a result of this, Lizzie was arrested, and the former privileged suspect was now finding herself in a 9.5 by 7.5 foot cell for the next 9 months. Her arrest provoked a national uproar. Women's groups like the Women's Christian Temperance Union rallied to her side. Her supporters demanded at trial that she should not be judged by a jury of her peers due to the fact at the time women could not legally vote, and this prevented them from serving on juries. They felt this bias would not allow Lizzie to have a proper trial, but luckily, well, Lizzie had a lot of money. She could afford the best legal representation during her trial, and she hired one of Boston's most prominent defense lawyers to work alongside her family's lawyer during her case. Daily, the courtroom was packed with individuals who supported Lizzie, from the wealthy who lived on the Hill to those who supported women's rights. At this trial, they heard how chemists did not find any blood on the axes or the hatchets that were found at the scene, and that the dress that Lizzie allegedly wore that day only had one tiny minuscule dot of blood on it. Whose blood it was? Well, the technology at the time was non-existent to be able to tell us. But if she bludgeoned 2 people, wouldn't she have had a lot more than just a tiny dot on her clothes? Perhaps the dress they looked at was not the dress she wore during the murders. After all, why was she ripping up a dress and burning it in the kitchen stove just days later? Was it possible that dress had paint on it? If it is, then why would you just wait till then to destroy it? Or could she have actually picked up that dot of blood at her parents' death scene? Now, Lizzie's attorneys stressed that the prosecution offered no murder weapon and possessed no bloody clothes. And as for that acid, they said Lizzie was a victim of misidentification. They pushed their narrative that Lizzie was a well-bred and virtuous woman who could never kill her own family members. After her attorney delivered a rousing closing argument in her preliminary hearing, Lizzie's supporters broke out into applause, but it didn't affect the judge though. He determined that she was probably guilty and she should remain in jail until a superior court trial could occur. The prosecutor and the district attorney were not happy with this news, even though the both of them thought that Lizzie was guilty. There were large, gaping holes in this case, and Lizzie had a massive amount of local and national support. The grand jury was convened and originally adjourned with no action. Then on December 1st, they reconvened to hear the evidence provided by Alice Russell. And after hearing about Lizzie's dress being pulled from a shelf that was in the pantry closet and that Lizzie burnt this dress since it supposedly got paint on it, the grand jury, they indicted Lizzie the very next day. Even with this, the district attorney knew that the odds were against him getting a conviction. But he was convinced he had the duty to prosecute, and he went forward anyway. He believed that a hung jury was within his grasp, and this could satisfy both sides and allow him to retry Lizzie, but he underestimated the legal and the cultural blocks that he was going to face. Lizzie was presented as a helpless maiden in court. She dressed in all black, just as her lawyer suggested. She also held a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a fan in the other. The press started describing her as a quiet, modest, and a well-bred woman who just didn't possess the physical strength or the moral corruption to kill. Lastly, the jury itself was a problem for the prosecution. People living in Fall River was excluded from the jury pool due to their perceived bias, but who ended up on the jury were those who practiced their religions regularly. Many jurors had daughters who were Lizzie's age, so it shouldn't be surprising that the jury decided to acquit a woman who the defense presented as pious. But after being acquitted, Lizzie still dealt with the ramifications of this trial for the rest of her life. After inheriting her half of her father's estate and moving to the Hill, Lizzie was shunned by many of the townsfolk and by those in her church. She became a local curiosity and was followed wherever she went by local kids. She was stared at, and she was talked about whenever she was in public. She eventually withdrew to her home, where local children would constantly pester her and pull pranks. Then, sometime after her trial, Lizzie and Emma fought and never spoke again. It appears that if Lizzie did not kill Andrew and Abby to better her personal circumstances, she did not get what she wanted after all. Thank you all for joining me for our latest episode of Horrifying History. Who do you guys think killed Andrew and Abby Borden? Was it Lizzie, or perhaps was it somebody else? Join us on Facebook at Horrifying History, on Instagram at Horrifying_History, and on Twitter at HorrifyingHIST1, and tell us your theories on who murdered the Bordens. I also have been asked by you guys, what is the best way that you can support this show? Well, the best way is by hitting that subscribe button for my podcast and by giving us a 5-star review with your podcast provider. With each subscribe button hit and by giving us a 5-star review, you let more and more people know about this show. The added bonus is when you hit that subscribe button, you will automatically download our next episode on its day of release. It's a great way not to miss our next episode, Horrifying Haunted Houses. Feel free to reach out to me anytime at horrifyinghistory@outlook.com with comments, questions, or story ideas. I love hearing from you guys. And if you want to bring a piece of horrifying history home with you, check out our great items in our store. You can find it by going to redbubble.com and typing Horrifying History in their search tool. Thank you all for listening again today. And until next time.